Hi guys, and welcome to this video. So today we're going to be working on a door system. Not just any system, it's going to be dynamic. We're going to have keys that will work for specific doors. So you will have a unique key for a unique door, or you could also make it so that this one key opens a bunch of doors. Let's get started. Okay, so by the end of this session, you should all be able to apply an interact system in Unreal Engine, construct a functional interactable door, and implement a dynamic key-based door system that differentiates between unique keys. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to create a blueprints folder. So right click and hit new folder and call this one blueprints. This is where we're going to store all of our blueprints. Go into that folder, right click, and we're going to create a blueprint interface. Now, you may be wondering, what is a blueprint interface? Well, I'm glad you asked, because so blueprint interfaces are basically an agreement between blueprints. When I call interact, anything that implements this interface must respond. So the red node here is the event interact. That's what fires on the object being interacted with. And the blue node is the call version. So this is what the player uses to trigger the event. Okay, so now we're going to go to our content browser, right click, and we're going to search for blueprints interface, and we're going to name it BPI interact. So we can start developing our interact event. So open up your blueprint interface, and we're going to name this new function interact. Hit compile, save, and then just close out of it. You're done. Cool. So next we need to do is create a button. So we've created an interact event, but we've not created a button which is going to pause the interact function. So let's go to content, input, actions. We're going to right click and we're going to click on input, input action, and I'm going to name this IA_interact. Now, what is an interact action? Sorry, what is an input action? I'm glad you asked, because input actions are basically the buttons the player uses. When the player presses their interact key, this node lights up and tells the game, hey, the player wants to interact now. So we only care about the triggered pin in our case. So that's the moment the button is actually pressed. Everything else in the game reacts because the one input action fires. So instead of writing press E everywhere, we just need to use the one action and plug it in wherever we need it. So now you know what an input action is. You want to double click and open your input action interact, and we're going to click plus under triggers, and we're going to set this to pressed. So it is a pressed function. You also have other functions such as if it's held down, if it's hold and release, if it's tapped. We're going to go with pressed. Once you've done that, hit save and close. Awesome. Now let's go back to input, go to IMC default, go to the default key mappings and drop down, click the plus button under mappings, and you should have a empty one here called none. We want to change that to our IA interact. Cool. Now where this keyboard is, if you just click it and press the button you want for your interact, in my case, the letter E, and hit save, we now have an interact button. But nothing is actually happening when we hit interact. So if we go to our content, back to our blueprints, in fact, before we do that, let's go back to content and go to our player character. Now you may have a different player character. I'm using the third person template for this video. So open BP third person character, find some space, and what we're going to do is we're going to right click in our event graph, and we're going to search for IA interact. Cool. Hit the drop down, not really necessary because we only need triggered, and on triggered we're just going to print a string, just so I can show you what it does. So if we hit play, every time I hit E, it tells me hello. Awesome. So we know it works. Let's go ahead and make a sphere trace. Now, you may be wondering what a sphere trace is. That's fine. Allow me to tell you. So, a sphere trace is like sending out an invisible bubble from the player, or wherever we're casting. So, anything that bubble touches, we can detect. So this could be stuff like doors, items, NPCs, anything like that. So it's how the game knows what you're looking at or standing near. Now, if the bubble hits something, we can interact with it. If it hits nothing, then we do nothing. So with the line trace, so the difference between, so line traces are very common, and the difference between a line trace and a sphere trace is that a line trace only shoots a thin line. A sphere trace shoots a sphere. So let's say we've got a small object like a key that the player needs to pick up. The player could actually miss this key with their line trace because the line trace is so thin. Whereas a sphere trace is like shooting, as I say, like shooting a almost like a ball at the location the player is sort of trying to shoot at. Cool, you now know what a sphere trace is. So let's go ahead and drag off triggered. Give yourself some space. I'm going to use a sphere trace by channel. We're going to get our mesh, which is our player character, and we're going to drag off that, and we're going to search for get socket phone, get socket location. I'm going to do it from the head because I want essentially the line trace or the sphere trace to start from where the player's head is. All right, so I don't want it to start from the feet, I don't want it to start from the hand. It's going to shoot from the head. So I'm going to plug that into start. I'm then going to get the follow camera. I'm going to get the forward vector because I want it to essentially shoot the trace where the camera is facing. So instead of it shooting from the head and forward, say the player's looking down, it's going to shoot from the head and downwards. Now I'm going to drag off get forward vector and multiply. And I'm going to change this to a float. So now this multiply is going to function as the distance from the player's head to how far away they're allowed to interact. I'm going to say it's 500. We're then going to add the socket location with the multiply and plug that into the end. Cool. Now, in order to see if this worked, first we need to set the radius to, let's say, something like 25. So if we left radius at 0, the line will be essentially work as a line trace. We want it to be sort of like a capsule sphere. So we also want to go to draw debug type and turn on persistent, just so we can see what it's actually doing. Hit compile and save. And now if we hit play, as you can see, it's shooting a sphere trace from the player's head to wherever the player is facing. Good stuff. So, as you can see, when it hits something, it turns green. And that's perfect for what we want to use it for. So we're going to check if it's hit a key or a door. So let's continue making the interact event. So what we need to do from out hit, we need to break hit result. And what we want to do is we want to right click hit actor, promote it to a variable. And just before we plug it in, I also want to make sure the hit actor is valid. So off of hit actor, search for is valid. Right click, type in branch, and plug that is valid into that. And then plug the branch into the trace. Cool. So I'm not going to go too deep in what a branch is. I think you guys can sort of pre-assume what a branch is. So if it hits something that is valid, we're going to continue. on true. If it doesn't, then we're going to continue on false. So on false, we want nothing to happen if it's hit something that is not valid. But if true, if it has hit something that is valid, we want to set that as the hit actor variable. Now, once we've essentially set the hit actor variable, we also want to check if the hit actor does object implement interface. And we're going to search for our BPI interact. Now, what this does is we're basically saying we're only going to move forward if it is interactable. Now we're going to right click and get our branch and plug that into the interface and plug the branch into the set. Cool. Now there's one more thing we need to do here, and that's called the interact function. Awesome. Now if I hit compile and save, we have an error. Oh no. And that's because we need to plug in the hit actor. So drag off hit actor from your variables and click get. And you want to plug that into interact. Now it has a target. All errors are gone. Awesome. So now let's go ahead and go to our level editor. And we want to right click. Before we do that, sorry, we want to go back to our content, go to blueprints, and here we want to right click, blueprint class, actor, and BP underscore door. Awesome. Double click to open it. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a static mesh, which is our 3D model for our door. And I'm going to name this SM underscore door. Always naming your folders and files properly is essentially really good practice. Even if you're only practicing sort of how to make projects in Unreal, extremely good practice to get used to naming stuff properly. So with the SM door selected, you want to go all the way to the right on details, and where it says static mesh is where you would select your own 3D door. Now, I don't have a 3D door, so I'm going to be using a default Unreal Engine cube. Okay, now I'm just going to shape this like a door. I'm happy with that. Now, I can't stress this enough, the importance of a pivot point. So, with a pivot point, if we was to rotate it, it's rotating like a door hinge, okay? Whereas if the pivot point is in the center, it's going to rotate from the center and your door's not going to work properly. Let me show you what I mean. So if I click onto our objects and spawn in a cube, you don't need to do this, just an example. And you'll find that the cube has a pivot point in the center. So the pivot point is the origin point of the mesh, which is where sort of your transform and stuff spawns in. If I now rotate, as you can see, it's rotating from the center. Now, can you imagine you've got a door frame? Okay, you guys know what a door frame looks like, I hope. And the door hinge is here, so the pivot point is here. If the pivot point is here, the door's going to open on the frame correctly. However, if the pivot point is here in the center, it's going to rotate from the center. So there's going to be a gap on either side of the door frame, which is not how doors work, unfortunately. So please keep that in mind, that we always want our pivot point on where you're wanting to hinge the door from. Awesome. So once you've done that, what we're going to do is go to our event graph, delete these because we don't need them. We're going to click class settings, and we're going to click add under implement interfaces, and we're going to search for our BPI interact. Awesome. Now, if you look on your My Blueprints, you should see interfaces, interact. You want to double click your interact interface to spawn it in as an event. Awesome. Now, I'm going to right click and start this event by a sequence. So a sequence is essentially, it's going to run multiple sort of events at once under one event. So on the start, what I want to do is, in fact, first thing I want to do is create a variable. And I want to call this key name. I'm going to make this a string and an array. Hit compile. Oh, hit compile and save. Now, what is a string and array, you may be asking yourself. I'm glad you asked because, so, a string is just text, like a key name or a code. An array is a list that holds lots of these strings at once. And an instance editable essentially means we can click on the door in our level and change its string or array without touching the actual blueprint. So this is how we make each door unique and have its own unique key set up without making new blueprints every single time. Cool, so you now know why we're using a string and array. Awesome. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to drag our, sorry, we don't need it to be a key name. Sorry, we don't need it to be an array. We need it to be a single. That's a mistake on my behalf, and I will explain why. So the reason for an array is a list, and a list is essentially going to function as an inventory. That being said, the door doesn't need an inventory. The player does. So for now, we're just going to put it as a string and set it as a single. And we're going to drag it in and get it. And what we're going to do is we're going to type in equals equals equals. And this is basically saying, is this key name exactly the same as what's in this box here? And I'm going to leave this box empty. Now, the reason for this is because the way I want this to work is if the door doesn't have a key name, then it doesn't require a key and will function as a normal door. So let's right click, spawn a branch in, and plug that into then 0. Cool. Now what we want to do is we want to get a timeline. And I know you're curious on what a timeline is, which is why. So a timeline is basically an animation curve inside a blueprint. When it plays, it slowly changes a value from point A to point B. So we use that to make things move smoothly, like a door sliding open instead of sort of snapping and teleporting. So when the timeline updates, it sends out this value and we plug that value into the door's movement. Exactly. So we're going to open up our timeline. I want the length of this timeline to be 1. I only want it to last 1 second. I'm going to click track and add a float track. I'm going to name this door alpha. And in the curve, I'm going to right click and add key to curve float. I'm going to set the time to 0 and the value to 0. I'm going to do the exact same again, but the time being 1 and the value being 1. Awesome. So it should look like this. Compile, save, and we can close our timeline tab. Now, what we want to do next is we want to get our door alpha. We want to alert rotator, and we want it to start at 0. So the door starts closed, and it's going to swing open. So the final destination, no pun intended, is going to be 90 degrees on the axis. Once you've done that, we're going to get our door mesh and we're going to set relative rotation. Plug the new rotation into the return value and plug the set relative rotation into the update. Okay, so we hit compile and save and spawn this door in. Just before we do that, we're going to go back to our BP door, click key name, and we're going to tick instance editable, as we previously mentioned in the presentation. Hit compile and save. And now if we go to our door and click it, we can see we have key name. Now I'm going to set this one to blue. I'm going to spawn in another door, and I want this key name to be empty. Remember what we said, if the key name is empty, it is going to function as a normal door. It will not require a key. So let's hit play. So if I go to this one, it now opens, which is great. However, it doesn't close, which is not great. So let's go back to our door. Right before our timeline, all we need is to create a little bit of space, and we want a flip-flop. Now flip-flop is like a switch. It's going to do A, and then it's going to do B, and then it's going to do A again. Okay, so we want A into play, B into reverse. Compile, save. Now let's test it out. Look at that. We have a door that opens and closes. That's perfect. This door does not open and close, and that's because this door requires a key that the player does not have yet. So let's do the blueprints for the key required part of the door. So off of then one, what we want to do is we want to cast to third person character or your own player. We're going to get player character. And before we continue, we need to create a list, an array of all the keys that the player owns. So if we go back to our player character and we click plus variable, we call this owned keys. We want this to be a string and it to be an array. We hit compile, save, and go back to our door. In our door, let's drag off as BP third person character and search for get owned keys. Awesome. Now what we need to do is we want to check if the player owns the relevant key. So we're going to search for contains. And we want to get our key name and plug it into contains. So what we're doing is we're going through the player's list of keys and checking if this store's key is in that list. We now need a branch. Plug that in. Let me just create a little bit more space. Awesome. And essentially, we want to print a string, then key not owned. This is going to tell us that the player does not own the key for this door, and not that the door is just randomly broken. And what we're going to do is just copy all the way from the flip-flop to the set relative rotation and paste it and plug that into true. So now if the player owns the key, it's going to open the door and work like a normal door. File and save, and let's go ahead and create our key. So right click in your content drawer, blueprint class, actor, BP underscore key. Double click to open it. We're going to add a static mesh, SM underscore key. And if you have a key mesh or a key 3D model, this is where you'd put it in the static mesh. Again, I also don't have a key mesh. I'm going to use the default Unreal Engine cube and just sort of scale it down. That's good for me. Hit compile. And we want to go to the event graph. Now, in the event graph, we want to delete those because we don't need them. We want to go to class settings. Under implemented interfaces, we want to add BPI interact. Exactly the same as we did with our door. We're going to double click our interact interfaces under my blueprint. And we're going to start our interact event. So what's going to happen when the player interacts with this? So first thing that's going to happen is the player is we're going to cast to the player character. get player character, and we're going to get the player's own keys. And instead of checking if it contains a key, we're going to add a key to the list. And the key we're going to add is going to right click here, promote to variable, and it's going to be this one. So key name. Awesome. And we also need to make sure instance editable is ticked here. Hit compile and save. And just before we continue, all we need to do is we need to destroy the actor right after the player picks it up. We don't want the player to have to be able to pick up, let's say, 10 blue keys when essentially the blue key will work for all blue doors. So compile and save. Oh, I do want to make this clear as well. You don't have to put blue for your sort of key names and door names. That's just my examples. You could use 1, 2, 3, whatever you want to call your doors. Okay, so let's test this out. Let's spawn the key in. Let's give the key a name. So I'm going to call this blue. We need to make sure the names match based on the door and the key. So blue and blue. Awesome. Now if I hit play and we try open this door, we do not own the key. We pick up the key and we can now open the door. Awesome. And we always have access to this door. Now, if you was to go ahead and duplicate, let's say, this blue door, let's just move this one out of the way. If I was to pick it up, the key, and we now have access to every blue door because they all have the same key name. Whereas if I was to get this door and change this one to pink, and let's spawn another key in, call this one pink. Now, if I pick up the blue key, I can open both of the blue doors. I cannot open the pink door unless I pick up the pink key, of course. And now I can pick up the pink key. Now I can open the pink door. Cool. So let's get rid of the sphere trace by going to our third person character. And we just want to get rid of the line. We want to get rid of the lines because the player doesn't need to see them and kind of getting in the way now. We know it all works. So under draw debug type, set it to none. Hit compile and save. And go back to your level editor. Now if we hit play, pick up a blue key, opening blue doors. We try open this door. We don't own the key. Pick up the pink key, open the pink door. And this door works as every single door. Now notice how it's popping up key not owned. Let's quickly fix that one. So if we go to the door and see where it's saying key not owned, it's right here. All we need to do is we can go here where we've done key name equals nothing, branch. All we need to do is copy that, go down here and paste it, plug that into the false branch, and plug through into this. Okay, now if we hit play, it should no longer pop up. Okay, that's my bad. We need to plug it in the false. There we go. So if we hit play, now we're not getting a pop-up message saying we need a key for a door that doesn't require a key. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, I feel like I've hit all the marks. We have the blue key, we have the blue door. One thing I'm going to do, just to polish it up a little bit, is I'm going to sort of create a material. So right click, new folder, materials. We're going to right click again and create material, m_flat color. Double click to open it. Right click base color and promote to parameter. And then I want this to be a flat color, so I'm going to make sure roughness is set to a 1. It's completely flat and not shiny. Hit apply and save, and you can close that. Now, if we was to right click flat color and click create material instance, call this mi underscore fc for flat color underscore blue. I'm going to duplicate this by Control D and do the same thing, call this pink, and I'm going to do it one more time for green. Now we're going to every single one, global vector parameter values. I'm going to go to the base color and ticket, and I'm going to set this one to blue. Hit save, close, same again, tick, green, save, close, and finally pink. Save and close. Awesome. So this is just for my peace of mind. If I click this key, put the pink on it, since this is the pink key, door, sem door, set the material to pink, click this one, and essentially just to match the color of the doors for good practice. Makes it a lot easier for you as a developer, but also the player. And we'll make it so the green doors don't need keys. So green. Cool. Now let's hit play. Pick up the blue key. We open the blue door. We can also close the doors. We cannot open the pink door without the pink key. And we can open every single green door. Perfect. Cool. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And yeah, thanks for watching. Awesome. So we've done great so far. So let's do a quick recap. So you built a full interact system that works across multiple objects. You used the sphere trace so that the player can detect what they're aiming at. You created a smooth door movement using a timeline. You made a door system dynamic using strings, arrays, and instance editable. And you set up doors to require unique keys without creating extra blueprints. And as a little bonus towards the end, you created a simple flat color material and you turned it into multiple material instances. So altogether, you now understand the core building blocks for scalable, reusable door blueprints and interactions in Unreal Engine. So well done. As always, thanks for watching and good luck on your game development journey.